I'm Teresa Martin from Lower Cape TV, and welcome to the second season of The Minds of Summer, produced in partnership with the Cape Cod Institute, which brings leading thinkers and doers from around the world to its renowned week-long workshops right here on the Outer Cape. Now, I usually prepare for these conversations by assembling a variety of topics, but today I'm doing something different. You see, we live in a season where anger and rage and divisiveness seems to define our every interaction. And today I feel blessed to be able to visit with Mirabai Bush, whose lifelong work applies contemplative practices to organizational life. Welcome.
Thank you.
So I want to start by saying just one word, and I wonder if we could spend our time talking about what it means, how it can be applied, and why it even matters. It's a word that comes up over and over again in your work, and one we seem to be missing in the swirl of events around us. And that word is compassion. So let me start by asking, what do you mean when you say compassion?
I define compassion as different from empathy. Empathy being that ability, capacity to experience another person's emotions, the whole range from joy to sorrow. To walk in another person's shoes. Compassion contains that. You have to have that capacity to be able to do that. But compassion is focused on another person's pain or suffering. But within it is the impulse or the desire to relieve that pain or suffering. So with empathy, you can just see and feel that somebody else's pain. But with compassion, you also are moved to do something about it, whatever is appropriate in the situation.
Well, I can see where in a business or in a government or in politics, people might not say compassion is a good thing because you want to win. Is that mutually exclusive?
Well, winning when it's reduced to the zero sum, I win and you lose.
Right.
At one level, you could say that compassion wouldn't be relevant. But on the other hand, we've worked a lot with lawyers, for example.
Not the most compassionate souls.
Right, who find that, they're in an adversarial situation, winning and losing. Right. But they do find that after doing these compassion practices, and that feeling compassion for the client on the other side of the case actually helps them both understand the whole situation better, so their argument is more relevant. And also they find that after the case comes to resolution, that what is decided is more longer lasting because it has considered everybody in the case. Lots of times in that winning and losing situation, somebody does win and the other person loses, and then it only opens up the opportunity for more conflict in the future. So
winning is kind of not really a long-term win in that case.
Exactly, yeah, because we're not separate from each other. We are interconnected with all of us. And so any solution to a problem, in as much as it incorporates that awareness, more likely it is to be a both effective and long-lasting solution.
So compassion needs to be part of a success mix for...
Absolutely, yeah. I've worked a lot with social justice activists, for example, and many feel like compassion for the enemy, the person on the other side of the, whether it's government or corporations or whomever. But actually, recognizing that person or organization is working out of a self-interest that they think is the best thing they ought to be doing.
Right.
Understanding that helps you come up with possible ways forward that are more likely to happen.
So that's interesting because sometimes when you listen to people, they will tell you that compassion is a sign of weakness.
Yeah. Well, one thing I find is that people who are in any of the caregiving roles or activism roles feel like compassion, that that developing compassion, which is part of self-care, is a weakness, in that they ought to be on the front lines doing the work, doing the hard work all the time, and not having compassion for themselves, not recognizing the ways in which they're losing their resilience and losing their edge because they haven't cared for themselves.
We just raised an interesting point that I don't want to lose, is that when we think of the word compassion, we always think of it as being for somebody else, but you've implied that you can compassion in a lot of different pointer directions.
Compassion, true effective compassion, requires two things in order to be really successful. The first is compassion for yourself, because if you can't appreciate that you suffer, you don't want to suffer, you want your suffering to be relieved, and so if you can express kindness for yourself in whatever form that takes, taking care of yourself. If you can't experience that, allow yourself to honor the vulnerability of whatever your suffering is, everything from discomfort to real suffering. Then you can't really appreciate what it is in others. I mean, I should say, in as much as you can appreciate your own suffering and how much you don't want it, and then cultivate that impulse to care for it, care for yourself. In as much as you can do that, you can then respond to others. If you're a person who doesn't care for yourself at all, your care for others is going to be very shallow. And the other element in compassion is an appreciation of others. So you learn to really appreciate yourself and your own suffering. And then appreciation for others. We just did a practice here at the Institute in this class I was giving, which is called Just Like Me. And it's not to replace all the work that we all need to do on our differences and our the intersectionality of all our differences, race, class, gender, economics,
and the million different ways we slice ourselves.
And we are all different and unique, and we shouldn't be projecting our sense of life onto others. But that needs to be complemented by an appreciation for the ways in which also we are the same. And those have to do with, being humans together, having a mind and a body. You have a mind and a body just like me. You have suffered in your life, physically, mentally, just like me. And we go through these ways in which things that we share. You want to be happy, just like me. And so cultivating that appreciation for others, as well as learning to be compassionate for yourself. When those two capacities come together, then you're better able to be compassionate for others who are suffering.
The compassion yourself, it's just intriguing me right now, because I think you're right, and the people for the caregiver role don't seem to shine it back on themselves. And then you have other people who seem to be overly concerned for themselves, but not necessarily in a compassionate way, maybe in a
ego-centered way, or
it's something we don't any of us seem to be terribly good at.
No, and I think we're afraid that it's going to be selfish or self-aggrandizing.
Can you give me an example of how would it look to be compassionate to yourself?
Well, I would think that I recently had a hip replacement, and leading up to that, it was very painful for many weeks. And I noticed that I was mostly repressing that. I was mostly thinking, I'll get through this. It's only pain. I'm going to get a new hip. Don't just forget it. Then when it was over, and there was no longer, and then there was the pain of recovery and so on. When it was over and there was no longer pain, I remember just waking up one night and realizing, there's no pain, and thinking, that was really hard all that time you were in pain. It was really hard. I'm really sorry that you had that happen, talking to myself. But had I been more kind of willing to see it, accept it, I could have done more hot tubs or something, different things that I would be saying to myself, you're in pain, you don't want to be in pain. And we're on the path of changing it. But in the meantime, just here's a little kindness for you.
Right.
You can leave that meeting 15 minutes early and relax.
Yeah.
So like that.
And I can see how that would almost prevent you from having that emotion, I'm sure this is right, having that interaction with somebody else, because the little part of you is going, well, I'm toughing it out.
Exactly.
What are you complaining about? I'm toughing it out.
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah, and it's a lot.
Yeah.
So I think that it's only recently come into the national dialogue in a positive way. Used to be,
Right.
just not considered and considered, as you said, like soft, meaning that not like soft skills that need to be cultivated as a complement for other skills, but
one of those
just
touchy-feely things that just,
exactly.
something you do with little kids maybe.
But we're coming more as a culture into recognizing. I mean, I think the rise of appreciation of emotional and all the factors of emotional intelligence has really helped us understand. I mean, the research showing that people who are more emotionally intelligent, all other factors being equal, are much more successful, particularly in organizations. So.
And that would seem, again, counter to sort of the traditional view of organizations where you focus on your abilities and how to, navigate through to the top, doing whatever political activities you need to do.
But I think that was all related to that early understanding of business where, each player was a cog in the wheel, that mechanistic understanding of how things happen. And now, of course, I mean, as we shift from manufacturing to the information society, I mean, here's an example. A good example. Google decided that one engineer at Google decided that Google offers so many courses. They used to call it Google University, but they offer so much training and courses for their people. And and when Google went public, there still weren't that many people working there, and they all, of course, were the next day. They would never have to work again. They were so wealthy. But Google told them they could stay. They were in their 20s and 30s, and they loved what they did. You can stay, but you have to do, and you can do whatever you want. But you have to do something that somehow has to do with our mission, which is, to get all the information in the world available to everybody for free. So, this friend of mine, Meng, he wanted to bring meditation into Google. It had helped him earlier. He had grown up in Singapore. And he thought it would be helpful to a lot of people there. So he first offered mindfulness-based stress reduction, which is the program that's offered in a lot of organizations. And nobody signed up for it.
No one?
Nobody. So what? He couldn't figure out what it was. He brought in a good teacher, and it didn't happen. So that's when he called me, because I had worked on bringing practice into other organizations, and we started talking about it, and we started looking at not just what people needed there, but what they perceived that they needed. And so at Silicon Valley, they're very young, they're very smart, they're very competitive, and they've been in front of their screens their whole lives. So they seem to have, every capacity developed, But what actually they were not so developed in was self-awareness and awareness of others.
Oh.
Those are the two pillars of emotional intelligence. So we figured that out, and so we redesigned and offered basically the same practices with an emphasis on loving kindness practice and compassion practice. Those practices, one would think, wouldn't be central to cultivating capacities for success at work. And then we offered it again. And we included a lot of relationship practices like mindful or compassionate listening, compassionate emailing.
Compassionate emailing,
Yeah.
I like that one.
And just lots of different ways of working together that that cultivated the appreciation of the other person, and and the ability and the desire to create a working environment that was harmonious, and while it could still be competitive, but harmonious, still be creative.
Right.
But the more in which you understood others and could feel compassion for others, the more likely your team was going to work better
That's
together.
the word that was coming to my mind was teamwork, and that's how you build
In the
it.
beginning, they were all writing algorithms, and they were sitting in front of their screens. But then they got bigger and bigger, and they needed to do, things got more complex, and they needed to work in teams. So this course that we developed as the big search engine, they called it Search Inside Yourself.
Okay.
And mindfulness-based emotional intelligence. And now that course has been, it's the most popular course in the history of Google.
Wow.
And has been taken by, I think at this point, maybe 10,000 engineers and others. And it's being adapted and emulated in different ways throughout the valley, but also in corporations rest in the country, because people are realizing more and more that it's not particularly cultivated in higher education.
No.
And but they arrive there and with these extraordinary challenges, and they need it.
Yeah.
So
I can definitely second that. I worked in the Valley for a company there, did a couple of startups, and worked with a lot of these very same engineers. And I don't think any of them, through training or personality, could be described as being able to make compassionate connections to others.
Yeah.
Not because they're mean people
No,
or anything, just
not at
because
all.
it's just not how they were cultured to work.
Well, the great thing is that scientists, only 10 or 15 years ago, they knew it before, but they declared it 10 or 15 years ago that the neuroplasticity, that the brain keeps changing. It keeps changing throughout your life. You know, they used to say old dogs can't learn new tricks.
Right.
I'm very happy to report that old dogs can. Not only you can keep learning, but you do keep learning.
Right.
And whatever you're doing is affecting your brain and creating stronger or weaker pathways. And that you can cultivate compassion through practice so that you are more likely when you encounter a situation to act in a compassionate way, because that pathway has been well worn in your brain.
I've heard you say a word a few times, and I want to ask again what you mean by this. You've said through practice. Now, do you literally mean by doing it again and again, or through the practice of a particular thing, a particular kind of activity?
There are exercises, practices that specifically are designed to cultivate compassion. We did a few today. One was this doing it in pairs, where you stand across from another person and silently repeat these phrases that are being said out loud about this person has experienced sadness just like me. That's the whole series of the ways in which we are the same, and then acknowledging all our differences as well. And then at the end, there's a series of well-wishing for that person. You know, I wish that you have the resources in your life that will help you, grow and be happy. I wish that you be free from pain and suffering. knowing, of course, that none of us are, but, and so you, then you have those wishes. So that is a practice that if you do that often enough, you begin to get it.
So it actually starts to change the way your brain thinks.
Absolutely.
I mean, those are things that we don't normally say aloud to each other.
I know.
I mean,
people do this together, and they are amazed. They say, "I feel closer to this person than to my spouse." After 5 minutes, because we always can appreciate each other, but most of the time we don't take time out to do it.
That's very true, especially in a workplace environment, especially in the Valley. Oh my God, no one ever stops for anything ever.
Exactly. Well, I tell you, they're stopping now. Well, there's a big conference in the Valley now called Wisdom 2.0 that brings together techies and people teaching mindfulness and other meditation practices. Yeah, I mean, thousands of people come to it. Yeah.
Well, one thing I found interesting about your work is I read an interview you did a while back with Wharton.
Yeah.
And what struck me in there is that it isn't just sort of new wave companies like a Google. It's big traditional companies. It's chemical companies. It's companies you wouldn't think would even let the word compassion enter their door.
But they all now realize that this. I mean, just talking about teamwork, just obviously so important. But even obviously in sales and marketing, appreciating the person on the other end and what it is, what they need, how they think. That's all. You need to tune into that person. Right. In order to do that. Now, of course, some of these things they're instrumentalized. So I want to act compassionately so that you will
you'll do this
buy
for me.
my stuff, But yeah, they're all recognizing that they really are interested in the very limited form of mindfulness that cultivates attention.
Right.
But there are a lot of things that cultivate attention. The power of mindfulness and compassion practices is that you do cultivate attention. Then you can bring that attention to what it is that you want to pay attention to and cultivate caring for.
So that could be very powerful. I mean, I can see it in interpersonal connection, but also in almost anything that you want to accomplish.
Yeah.
That's a neat way to look at it.
And I mean, in technology, they may be sitting there writing an algorithm, but we're hearing about this now because of the limits to the diversity in the engineers, so few women, so few African Americans, and so on, that these algorithms and other products that soft and hardware that they're developing, they're influenced by the engineer who's developing them. And so if you get a more compassionate engineer who is like thinking about the user in a way that is deep and broad, and he's going to produce something that, I mean, these softwares, like, it's changing our brains.
Yeah.
And to the more compassionate, appreciative the engineer is who's developing it, the more likely we are going to cultivate those capacities as we use their software.
That's kind of interesting that they're shaping something that's shaping us.
Yes.
I mean, whether that's intentional or not. It is what it
It
is.
just is. Yeah. So.
You said something else too about that people don't learn this in school. They don't learn this in college. So is there an application for this at the other place that shapes our brains during our various steps of schooling?
Yeah, well, actually, there are lots of programs now in K through 12 around mindfulness and loving kindness and compassion, and those are wonderful. There are quite a number of programs, and quite a few schools are beginning to adapt them because it's, as you can imagine, helpful in so many ways. And the Center for Contemplative Mind that I helped found, and now I'm a senior fellow there. Or as my granddaughter says, you're a fella. Fellows are boys.
Thank you, sweetie.
I'm a fella. So, We have, there are many programs now in higher education. Many people are incorporating mindfulness practices, compassion, the whole range of what we call contemplative practices into their curriculum, into their teaching. And then, of course, there's a lot happening in student services because, for all the reasons, there should be more. I mean, one great development is that the corporations now are saying, you know, we would like these graduates, you know, to come to us already having developed these capacities.
That's incredibly powerful.
Yeah. So, and you know, it's at a time when, I mean, in engineering schools, they feel like there's so much that students have to learn that they're, you know, dropping out the humanities in a major way, and which is a shame because, of course, through the humanities, we learn what it is to be human, and to be human involves compassion. But so they're dropping out everything except, you know, the hard stuff. And so it's really good now to hear the corporations say, we would like them to arrive. We're more likely to hire somebody if they have this training. So we're looking to see ways. I would like to see Search Inside Yourself adapted for specifically for higher education. I live in Northampton, Massachusetts. Smith College is there. They have the first engineering school for women there, and I want to see them and some other innovative schools.
My daughter's going to Hampshire in the fall.
Oh, great!
So
come and visit.
The kind of place, that's the kind of place that I would think. You know, I've been thinking about this a lot. And I've been looking at, you know, you read about college, the epidemic of suicides, and just these horrible things. And what you're saying about self-compassion as the first starting block, it just kind of jumped up. That's to learn. That is to learn how to function in a very different adult stressful world.
Oh, really? I teach the orientation week for incoming Amherst students. That, you know, 400 selected from 8,000 applicants, and they're so stressed.
Yeah.
And and so one of the things they're so hard on themselves, so much self-judgment. One of the elements of mindfulness is not being non-judgmental. So that has to be. It doesn't mean that you don't make decisions, but that you use wise discernment instead of prejudging or judging yourself inappropriately. But that self-judgment related to self-compassion and just the mindfulness practices help you see that that's going on.
Yeah.
So.
And that's something I think kids lose as they're in the world we've structured where they go into college, that transition, then the transition into the workforce. I think people lose the ability to look at themselves in a kind way because they feel they're being judged by everything externally.
Yeah, because there is that. I mean, there is the whole system of grades and so on.
Yeah.
And that is an external judging. But they need to learn to let go of their self-judging. Not self-assessment, maybe, but self-judgment.
Right.
Yeah.
We are almost out of time, amazingly enough. Is there any tip you would give for anyone who's living every day of how would you start your own little tiny practice of
well, you can just sit down, allow your body and mind to just quiet down for a moment, to relax, sitting with your back straight and your feet on the floor, just for a moment. And then ask yourself, what am I feeling right now? What am I thinking right now? What's happening for me right now? And then just notice that. You can breathe in and out with it a few times. Just notice. It's the coming into awareness of what's going on inside yourself that will help you see the ways in which, you know, you maybe are judging yourself, or you're moving so fast that you're not making good choices. That's self-awareness. And really sitting down quietly and breathing in and out and noticing is very powerful.
Well, thank you so much. I was breathing as you were saying that.
saw
I couldn't. I just automatically went into that mode. It was so nice, just for a little second.
Great.
So compassion is a very powerful word. It's a word of strength, and it's a word of action, even though we often don't think that. And it's
yes,
a word I think it sounds like we should all spend a little more time looking at.
definitely.
Thank you so
This
much.
was fun.
I really appreciate you being here.
Yeah. Good luck to your daughter.
Thanks.
Amherst is such a great place.
This is Teresa Martin from Lower Cape TV, and we've been speaking with Mirabai Bush about compassion. Thank you.